I've restarted my PC repeatedly, and I've been trying to figure out if there's anything I could have done wrong in my methodology for this benchmark, but I can't find anything. I'm showing that after the Title 4 update on my Ryzen 5 5600X, when CPU limited, and I'm intentionally CPU limited here by playing at a low resolution 1080p and also upscaling in performance mode using a fairly powerful GPU. I decided to use the Monster Hunter Wilds edition of the 9070 XT because that seemed appropriate for the testing we're doing today. The point is, I've put in a powerful enough GPU compared to the 5600X, and I'm using performance mode upscaling at 1080p and at medium settings that we are CPU limited. We're measuring the CPU here, not the GPU, and it's the Ryzen 5 5600X. And I'm testing out the first mission of the game so that I can take my hands off the controls and just let the following scene here, where you just kind of follow the other guys on the secret, however you pronounce it. Guys, I don't actually play this game. I don't actually like this game. Anyway, but people want me to test it on the channel. My channel is about benchmarking stuff. So I'm benchmarking it. So I'm benchmarking this scene so I can get like for like footage. And here we can see that I'm getting 52 FPS on the new patch, and I was getting 64 prior to the patch when I tested it out 2 days ago. I'm on the same drivers. I'm on, there haven't been any Windows updates. I checked to see if there were any Windows updates or something downloading in the background. Couldn't find anything. So I'm seeing reduced performance here, and I cannot find anything wrong with my methodology. I don't know if other CPUs would see different results. Maybe somehow I'm missing something, but like I said, multiple game restarts, running the run multiple times to make sure it's consistent results. This is what I'm seeing. Now what you're looking at is I've also changed the graphic settings. So now I've decided to use maximum graphic settings. So this is ultra settings with ray tracing set to high, but still at 1080p output with FSR4 performance on the 9070 XT so that we are CPU limited. And here, I am seeing that we are once again showing worse performance after the patch. I'm getting 46 FPS by the end of this run compared to 58 FPS prior. So I'm reaching 79% of the previous performance. So that is really concerning. Now, one reason I'm testing the 5600X is the developers actually specifically mentioned that this is the most commonly used CPU for users within the recommended kind of system spec range. This is the most commonly used one, and they even released their own footage claiming that a 5600X based system is showing improved performance. However, they're not really isolating for CPU versus GPU performance. They're just showing the entire build, and they're not really giving a lot of stats. They're also not showing side-by-side identical gameplay, but they're claiming that they're getting better performance here. And again, they've claimed that there's been over 100 processing improvements focused on players, monsters, secrets, palicos, NPCs, graphical user interface, effects, and environmental features. So all I can say is in my CPU limited testing on the Ryzen 5 5600X, I can't seem to find anything going wrong on my system, anything happening in the background. All I can say is I'm showing reduced performance, but I can't claim that's going to be the case everywhere in the game or on every CPU or everybody's system. But I was hoping to show dramatically improved CPU performance, because that's one of the big issues with this game is like on a Ryzen 5 5600X, you couldn't even lock 60 FPS. This is a scene with very little happening here. And not only was it not locking 60 FPS before, it's now worse for me. So that's that. Now, I do have better news to report for the GPU limited performance. So the test you're looking at now is the 5060 Ti 16GB. It's the PNY version. And this is at 1440p Ultra, and I've moved over to a 9800X 3D CPU. The reason is we're now on a high-end CPU and a lower, not low-end, but a lower GPU relative to that, and we're at high graphic settings, 1440p Ultra. So we're now fully utilizing the GPU. We're not waiting around for the CPU. So now we're measuring improvements to optimization that are affecting the GPU, again, at least in what's going on in this situation, which is just kind of riding along down the pathway here. Here I am measuring an improvement, although only 4% at these settings. I'm getting 54 FPS now. when previously I was getting 52. I'm also noticing the 1% lows are tied at 43. So here, at least for GPU limited performance, I am at least measuring an improvement. But notice that right now, the current frame rate is 44 frames per second, now up to 45, when there's a few monsters on scene. And this is on a 5060 Ti. Now it is 1440p Ultra native resolution. So I did also go ahead and test out DLSS balanced as well to see how that did. That does get my average up over 60 FPS, and I'm noticing that my frame rate has actually improved by 5 FPS now, or 8%, with this patch. I've gone from 63 FPS to 68 FPS. So like I said, 8% improvement, and my 1% lows have improved from 52 to 56. However, I will mention that as we get here where there's just a few monsters on the screen, our frame rate does dip to just barely over 60 FPS. And actually dipping slightly under 60 FPS here. And again, we're using balanced level upscaling on a $430 graphics card, right? So this is still pretty demanding, but this is the ultra settings. So I did go ahead and test out other graphics settings as well. So this is the high preset and native resolution. So high preset, but disabling upscaling. The presets themselves include upscaling. So this is with upscaling disabled, but otherwise at the high preset. I'm showing 56 FPS now versus 53 previously. That is a 6% improvement. And the 1% lows have improved by 7% from 46 to 43. But notice, again, that our average is well below 60 FPS. At high settings, 1440p, this is native. And notice that with these few monsters on the screen in front of us, the frame rate is currently in the mid 40s. So certainly still very demanding here. Now I did also try out DLSS balanced on the high preset. And this is now showing me a 6% improvement with the new patch compared to the previous patch. 72 FPS versus 68 for the averages, and the 1% lows are 59 versus 55. Once again, once you have a few monsters on the screen, though, like we're seeing here, even using the reduced preset down to high and balance level upscaling, frame rate is barely staying over 60 FPS, although previously it was dropping a little below 60 FPS, so there is an improvement here. But again, once you get a few monsters on the screen, the game is still very, very demanding. But I tried out the medium preset as well. So with the medium preset, comparing patch versions, by the way, if you see momentary lighting differences, I think there's some cloud cover that's not completely identical, over time. So sometimes it'll be a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, but it's the same settings. I'm not noticing any consistent major graphical differences with the update. Like I said, I think there's just some difference in the lighting and shadow since that's dynamic and doesn't play out exactly the same way every run. Anyway, I am seeing the new patch at 60 FPS versus 58 previously. It's a 3% improvement, and the 1% lows are 2% better at 48 versus 47. Again, even though we're on the medium settings, once we get a few monsters on the screen, my frame rate does dip into the upper 40s and low 50s. And again, this is just with a handful of monsters on the screen on a 5060 Ti all the way down to the medium settings at 1440p. However, if I do kick on the balanced mode upscaling, frame rates do improve. We're now getting 78 FPS on the new patch. We were getting 74 previously. That's a 5% improvement with the new patch. 1% lows have increased from 60 to 64. So that's a 7% improvement. And again, jumping ahead to this more demanding area where we actually get a few monsters on the screen, we are able to stay over 60 FPS at these settings. But again, we are all the way down to medium with balanced level upscaling on a current generation, fairly new GPU that's fairly expensive for a lot of people's budgets, $430. Anyway, I also tested out the low settings. So the low settings, 1440p with upscaling disabled, so native 1440p, but low preset, I am getting 72 FPS over my little run here versus 68 previously. It's a 6% improvement, and the 1% lows have improved from 55 to 57, so that's a 4% improvement. Once again, if I skip ahead to where there's a few monsters on screen, we are dipping below 60 FPS at times, although it's kind of hugging that boundary line. But again, we are in the low settings, albeit native resolution, 1440p, on a 5060 Ti. And this is one of my issues with the game, is there's just not a lot of scalability here. The 5060 Ti 16GB is not a cheap low-end GPU, or old. It's a current generation, fairly expensive GPU. And we're already down at the low settings. Now, if you're on the low settings and you kick on DLSS balanced, it does improve the frame rates. And we're at 87 FPS now versus 83 on the previous patch, so 5% improvement. And the 1% lows have improved from 67 to 71, so a 6% improvement on the 1% lows. Again, we can jump to this more demanding area and check out the frame rate as we get a few monsters on screen. We are staying over 70 FPS here. So if you go all the way down to the low settings and upscale heavily on a fairly modern GPU, you can stay over 70 FPS once there's a few monsters on the screen. Now, there is a setting, a preset below low. It is lowest. And at 1440p native on the lowest preset, but with upscaling disabled, so we're back to native. Again, note that there's some lighting differences as shadow cover varies, but over time it balances out here. We're seeing 72 FPS versus 68. It's a 6% improvement to the average FPS, and the 1% lows have improved from 55 to 58, which is a 5% improvement. And again, if we get a few monsters on the screen, we're still dipping below 60 FPS at times, even on the lowest possible settings on a 5060 Ti 16GB, trying to run native 1440p. So even on the very lowest graphics preset, if you want to stay over 60 FPS, and again, it's not the CPU, we've got the 9800X3D in here, you will need to use upscaling still. So kicking on DLSS balanced on the lowest possible preset, I'm averaging 88 FPS compared to 84 on the previous patch, giving us a 5% improvement, and the 1% lows have improved from 69, which was nice, but now we're up to 71. It's a 3% improvement. Again, if we go to the kind of the stress test here with some of the creatures on screen, we do stay in the 70-something FPS range. But again, we are upscaling heavily on the lowest possible settings on a fairly expensive new GPU paired with the fastest possible CPU. So that is where we're at with my testing. I certainly don't think that these visuals justify the performance cost. That's what I've been saying since the beginning. Now, again, the GPU has improved. I would say we're seeing what I would call about a 5% or so improvement. And actually, if you read the post from the developers, they're also basically saying we've also confirmed a frame rate improvement of roughly 5% or more in the Scarlet Forest and Oilwell Basin. In other words, they're also mentioning when they actually give any hard figures for percentage uplift, they're saying about 5%. And that's pretty consistent with my testing. But again, I'm only testing this one area of the game. And depending on what's happening in the game, it's possible that some of these upgrades maybe made a more significant impact. And again, I can't find anything wrong with my CPU testing methodology, but I'm seeing surprisingly bad results where performance degraded. Maybe I did something wrong. I ran it so many times trying to figure out what's going wrong. I can't see anything I did wrong, but let me know what's happening with your CPU limited performance, because that doesn't look good. So hopefully there's something wrong with my CPU testing, because it'd be awful if the already bad CPU performance somehow got worse. But at least the GPU limited performance is a little bit better. I would certainly not call the game very well optimized at this point. Now, they have promised additional improvements incoming. So after this 100 or so optimizations, which got us, 5% or so on the GPU and potentially worse CPU performance, they are promising some PC-specific processes optimized in January, as well as promising some VRAM usage improvements, and some improvements to texture streaming speeds, apparently, as well as improving shader compilation process. So they're still promising some more optimizations. And then in February, they're promising additional CPU and GPU optimizations, and adding level of details, LOD quality levels, to the polygon mesh for 3D models, which should reduce GPU processing load. And they are also re-examining memory-related processes to identify further potential improvements. So at least they're saying they are continuing to work on optimization. But if you were hoping that this update with the hundreds of, 100 or more optimizations was going to be some dramatic 50% uplift or even a 10 or 20% uplift, that's not what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing closer to 5%, which seems to be what they are maybe claiming as well when you read the details on their blog post. I also have some questions about so adding level of detail. I hope they already had a reasonable amount of LODs. Are they rendering some of this background stuff at just way higher resolution, way more polygons than it needs to? Is that part of what's killing the performance? I don't know, guys. But when I look at a scene like this, I just don't feel like, the frame rates are justifying what we're seeing on this hardware. This doesn't look impressive, but the lowest possible settings with upscaling on a fairly expensive new GPU, performance isn't what I would consider to match the visuals. Who knows? I don't know how much this engine can be fixed in open world games. It doesn't seem like RE Engine interacts well with open worlds. But anyway, people were asking me to check out the new patch, so I did. Also, to be clear, this isn't compared against launch footage. This is just from the previous patch to this one, so Title 3 versus Title 4. That's what I've got for you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and all of you have an excellent day.